Well, thank you, Dan, for leading us in those beautiful songs. It's good to see all of you this morning, and just making sure this was on here. We appreciate so much everyone being here, and I appreciate the honor of being able to speak before you as we talk about God's Word. You know, we're living in very interesting times, to say the least. I think that would be a kind way of putting it. You know, we have COVID, which we've talked about ad infinitum. We're all tired of COVID. But we also have supply line shortages, which you could write your doctorate dissertation on why we have supply line shortages. We have immigration overflow. We have criminals taking over parts of our cities. We have judges who follow the laws, putting many of these same criminals back out on the street in a very short order. And then we have legislators who make the laws pointing their fingers at the police. And then we have the police pointing the fingers at the mayor. And then we have the mayor pointing the fingers at the governor. And then we have the governor pointing his finger at what's wrong with the governor who came in before him. And on and on and on and on. After a while, it just makes your head just want to explode. You say, where is the reason here? Don't we have any more reason in our society? Makes me wonder sometimes if there's a single leader in our country who takes responsibility for their actions. It's always this business. I didn't do it, it's the other guy's fault. Either the guy who came before me or the guy who's going to come after me, but it's not my fault. And that's symptomatic of our whole society, because our whole society wants a no-fault life. No matter what they do, when they do it, it's not my fault. Somebody else made me do it, or it's their problem. Well, that's really not the way it works. Maybe Diogenes was right. Some of you may recognize that name, Diogenes. The story goes that Diogenes, who lived back in 412 to 323 BC, was living in Athens. And he went through the marketplace in broad daylight carrying a lantern. And you can just picture this. In broad daylight, the lantern is lit, and he's carrying it and walking around. Finally, somebody says, Diogenes, what are you doing? He says, I am looking for a man. And you can just see, look, there's men all around the place. Well, later writers, for our benefit in Western language, made a slight addition to this. And he said, I am looking for an honest man. And to understand why they did that, you have to go back to the Greek. When they called somebody a man, it was not just gender and his maturity. It was talking about that you give that title to a person who is responsible, who lived up to what he said he was going to do, and he had personal integrity. In other words, an honest man. So Diogenes says, I'm looking for an honest man. What he was doing was condemning all in Athens. You guys are a bunch of dishonest liars, because I cannot find an honest man among you. He was known to be a gadfly of the politicians in Athens, and they disliked him intensely. I think if we put Diogenes in Chicago, you would find him walking down Michigan Avenue with his lantern, going up to the mayor's office. What are you doing? I'm looking for an honest man. I think he would do it today, and it would still be correct. He was making this comment that we have all said in our lives, can't we find somebody to put in office who has some integrity and won't be swayed with every little wind of persuasion, as Paul calls it? Well, this dishonesty is not something new. It's been around since the very beginning, and we know, and Jesus taught this, and the Bible teaches it, that the author or the father of dishonesty was Satan himself, the one we call Lucifer sometimes. So if Satan is the father of lies and dishonesty, what is the corollary? In other words, who is the author of truth and honesty? Well, that's God the Father, and through Jesus, he's revealed this to us. Jesus taught, and I've said this often from the pulpit, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And we tend to talk about that, but sometimes we don't think about it enough to really appreciate it. When he said this, the people were still under the old law. You have to remember, when he was speaking, they were under the old law. The Christian dispensation had not occurred yet. And they were bound by the law. And the Sadducees and the Pharisees literally put burdens on their backs trying to make the people live up to the law when they themselves didn't live up to it. Sounds familiar today, too. You have to do this, but we don't have to do this. Well, the complete truth about God was being revealed to them, and it had been being revealed to them through the Old Testament. And they did not have what we have today. Which we have today is the complete revelation of God through Jesus Christ here written before us that we can refer to. What they had during Jesus' time was what we consider to be the Old Testament. So God was continuing to reveal to them what the truth of his will was, and he finally brought his son. After bringing the lawgiver Moses, the prophets, and then recording the history of the Jews, he finally brings his son here. And this idea of you shall know the truth means it implies that it's an ongoing process. And this is what Jesus was talking about. You shall, as you go on and you continue to learn about what God's will is, this truth will make you free. The difference today is that we have the complete revelation of God, where they only had part of it. Now, one of the truths that the Bible reveals to us is that man was created with a very long lifespan. Just think about this for a while here. And note that the patriarchs, if you go to the book of Genesis, chapter 5, Adam lived 930 years. But several generations later, Lamech, the father of Noah, only lived 770 years, only 770 years. But by the time of Abraham, lifespans had decreased to about under 200 years. Abraham lived to be 175. And you say, well, what's going on here? They started out with all these great lifespans, and they're getting shorter and shorter and shorter as the generations go on. Well, Satan was very happy about this, I'm sure. He was just pleased as can be, because Satan is the one who originally caused this shortening of lifespans. Now, how does this work? Well, in the beginning, God created the earth and everything in it, including us, mankind. And Genesis chapter 1, verse 31 says this: God saw that all he had made, and it was very good. God doesn't make junk, right? He makes the best. You know, when they have the saying, advertising, if you really care, you will send your very best. And we think that the advertising people on Fifth Avenue did that. It comes right out of the Bible. God sends his very best. He sent his son here, the very best. That he saw that all that he had made, and it was very good. Now this means without blemish, complete in every way, and that included mankind. So we were created originally without this shortened lifespan. Now here's the problem. One man, Adam, permits sin to come into his life. And Paul tells us this. He says, therefore, just as through one man sin entered the world, and death through sin, and death spread to all men. Why? Why, Paul? Well, because all men sinned. So death is the end measuring point of life. And lifespans got shorter and shorter until medical science says, well, we can help out on that. You know, today in some third world countries, the lifespan for an adult male is under 50 years. Some of them it's around 40 years because their conditions are so bad and their medical practices are so remote and difficult to get to. And with diseases and the hard work they have to, they don't live very long. Well, if the end point of our life is death, that is death of this mortal life, when breath leaves us and this body dies, what's the starting point? Well, it's birth. No. The starting point is conception. And this fact that life starts at conception is conveniently forgotten by our pro-choice friends. Here's their logic. They say, well, life begins at birth. So if we don't have a birth, we don't have any problems. There's no loss, no foul, nothing. In other words, I'm not doing wrong if we prevent life before birth. Well, they fail to understand that when abortion is committed, They sin against God and against the unborn, the innocent. They're murdering an innocent. Why? Because life begins at conception. You say, well, that can't be. Well, Jeremiah records this in Jeremiah 1:5. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. This is God revealing this to Jeremiah. It says, before I formed you in the womb, before you were born, I consecrated. How could God consecrate something that was not a person? He consecrates people for a particular job. David tells us this in Psalm 139:13. For you saw my inward parts, you formed my inward parts, and you wove me in my mother's womb. God knows these innocent babies prior to the birth. So that whole argument about, well, if there's no birth, we haven't committed a sin, it's not murder because it really wasn't a person. Well, you may think that way. Somebody may think that way. But God doesn't think that way, and he will hold it against those people who commit those murders of the innocents. I was thinking maybe we should measure lifespans from conception to death, but there's a problem with that. We don't know when conception takes place. God knows when conception takes place. He's aware of that. He knows the instant it takes place. We don't. Also, we do not know the time of our death. We surmise at a certain age, yeah, you probably get liable to it. As you get over the age of 70, you think more about it. There's some here who are over 70 along with me, and you do contemplate that a little bit. And you can let it get to you. As a matter of fact, with this whole COVID thing, many of us have thought about impending problems with us or our relatives getting sick and possibly losing their lives. But God knows when we are about to leave this earth. He knows we are in his hand. And if your time has not been called by him, you don't go. So when your time is called, you go. Now, I know you're going to say, well, there's an exception to that. Hezekiah prayed that he'd be given more years and so on and so forth. When he was on his deathbed, he had asked the prophet. The prophet said, no, you're going to die. So he turned his face to the wall and he prays to God. He said, please remember all the good things I have done and so on and so forth. And God added 15 years to his life. So Hezekiah had 15 more years, and they were good years. Except during those 15 years, he fathered a son whose name was Manasseh. And if you want to read about what a nice guy Manasseh was, go into the book of Kings and you can read about Manasseh. 55 years of rule, and he was bloodthirsty. He was one of the nastiest kings that Israel ever had. So it was good for Hezekiah, but it was not good for Israel. So be careful what you ask God for. You know, Paul relates that he yearned to be at home with Jesus, but yet he had work to do here. And he reasons this out with himself. He says, well, if I go home, that's gain. I think you can find this in Philippians chapter 1. If I go home to be with my Lord, it's a gain for me because I get to be there with Jesus. However, if I stay here, I get to do his work, and I'll be able to bring the gospel to other people. That's gain for me also, and it's gain for them. He said it's win-win. No matter what happens to me, I win. And this is what Christians should be thinking about death. No matter what happens to us, whether we stay or we go, it's a win-win situation. You cannot lose if you're a Christian. If you've given your life to Jesus Christ, he'll take care of you. And he will call you home at the time that you are going to go home. Not before, not after. You know, God places in our hearts these two distinct longings as Christians. One is to remain here, be on this earth with the things we love and the people we love and so on. We don't want to leave this. We love it. Especially as you get on in years and you have kids and distant relatives and you're getting along and things are great. You don't want to leave that. On the other hand, as Paul says, to be at home with Jesus Christ in a heavenly home is much better than this. Solomon writes this. This is in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, around verse 11. He has made everything appropriate to its time. Everything. He has set eternity, he has set eternity in their heart, yet so no man will not find out the work of God which is done from the beginning even to the end. What he's saying here is that in our hearts, God has placed this yearning for eternity. It is normal for us to look beyond this life and say, what comes next? Now, for many people in this world, they say, well, when you die, it's oblivion. That's the end of you. There's nothing left. No essence of you, nothing. You're just done. But for Christians, that's not the way it is. We look at this life as part of a journey. We have this mortal life on this earth. And then, after this, comes another adventure. And we have, parts of this have been shown to us. All throughout the Old Testament, there's little bits and pieces here and there about what comes after this. The real message that in the book of Revelation, you can go there and you can see where we're going, what it looks like. It's kind of poetic language, but the idea is definitely there is something to come after this life. It's a shame. There are many people in this world who don't think that at all. And there are many people who think, oh yeah, there's something to come, but it's not going to be good. Well, they're absolutely right, because there are two parts to our eternity. You can either have the good part or you can have the bad part. Well, how do I know which one I get? Well, you can help yourself that way by living your life properly in this life, according to the standards that Jesus has put forth. And then when you leave this life, when this mortal body turns to dust, your soul returns to God who gave it. Now, there's a judgment day coming, and we've all talked about this before too. And there's two parts. You can either go to the bad part or the good part. It's up to you. We have free will. We have to decide what we're going to do. But we get anxious about this. And we start to worry about it. And here's what Jesus said in Matthew 6:27. He says, who of you by being worried can add an hour to your life? Another version of it says, who of you can be worried can add a hair to the top of your head? It doesn't work that. You can worry about stuff all you want. It doesn't do anything. It's not going to add to your life. Jesus told the apostles, dealing with this idea of death and departure, he told the apostles, he says he was going, but they could not follow him at that time. When they asked him where he was going, he spoke kind, reassuring words to them to let them know that don't worry about this. And it's in the book of John, chapter 13, around verse 36. And Peter said, Lord, where are you going? He wanted to know, because Jesus said, I'm going to leave you guys, but you can't follow me now. And Peter said, of course, we expect Peter to speak up, being kind of the first one to speak. And Jesus replies, you cannot follow me now, but where I'm going, you will later follow me. And Peter continued, and he says, Peter, he can't let things lie. He's going to keep on it. Why can't I follow you now? Why can't I follow you now? I want to know. I will lay down my life for you. And Jesus said, oh, really? Will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I tell you, a rooster will not crow until you have denied me 3 times. Now, you can imagine Peter. Peter loved Jesus. And he's there with all the apostles. This happened in the upper room. And Peter is being told by Jesus, you're going to deny me. Can you imagine Peter there, what a blow that was to Peter? I can just see him, Peter, big strapping fisherman. You can just see him almost dissolving, What? I don't understand it. But Jesus knows what Peter's thinking. And he knows how Peter is feeling inside. And look what he says here. He says, do not let your heart be disturbed. In other words, Peter, don't worry about this stuff. It's all going to work out in the end. Do not let your heart be disturbed. Jesus knew how to comfort. And Jesus continued with these words. He said, many rooms are in my Father's house. Now, in some of your scriptures will say, there are many rooms in my Father's mansion, or there are many mansions in my Father's mansion. Various translations. The idea is there's a place. There's a dwelling place. And within that dwelling place, there are spaces. And Jesus said, there are many spaces here. He said, many rooms are in my Father's house. If this were not true, I would have told you. So Jesus said, what I'm telling you is the truth. I'm giving you an image of what we're going to. When we leave this life, where we go. I go to make a place ready for you. The master is going to work for me to make a place for me. How about that? And if I go to make a place ready for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that you also may be where I am. Now, that's it. Why can't I go with you now? You can't come with me now, but you will later. As a matter of fact, I'm going there, and I'm going to prepare a special place just for you, so that when your time is called, you will be there with me, not by yourself. You're not going to be alone. You're going to be there with me, Jesus says. And you know the way to the place where I am going. So Jesus gives them these reassuring words. Do not worry about death. Don't worry about when your death is going to happen. It will happen at the appropriate time. Just as Solomon said, God appoints a time for everything to happen. Now, Thomas was there. Thomas is always called the doubting apostle. And Thomas says this. He says, we don't know the way. We don't know the way to where you're going. See, it's still sinking in. They don't realize quite that Jesus is talking about a heavenly home. It has to sink in with them. They have to think about it a little bit. And here's what Jesus says. He's kind of put this all in the proper perspective. He says, I am the way. Because Thomas said, what? We don't know the way to go. He says, I am the way. In other words, you pay attention to me, you're not going to get lost. He said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Because Jesus is standing there with them, and they're talking about heavenly things where God is. He says, yeah, you want to go there. My Father's house has all these rooms I'm going to prepare for you. But you can't get there if you don't go through me. There's no other way to do it. Why? Because I am the way to get there. I am the truth and I am the life. And the truth leads us to a proper understanding of things. You shall know the truth and it will make you free. It'll be free of anxiety, free of wrong turns, free of walking the wrong path. I will be able to walk on the correct path. Why? Because I know the truth of it. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you know me, you also know the Father. From now on, you know him and you have seen him. We haven't seen. He was saying, you see me? You're seeing the Father. The things I say, you're hearing the Father. The things I do, you're seeing the Father do. So he's telling them, reassuring, this is right from God the Father. Through me, you've heard these words. If you believe these things, then you're going to listen to me and you're going to do what I ask you to do. Jesus went on telling them in so many words this story, and that he and the Father are one, and that those who love him obey him, and those who are obedient will find room in the Father's house. You see, there's a history, there's a trail that you can follow there with the logic of what Jesus is saying. And they could not follow him now because their time had not come. They had work to do. The word had to be spread, and Jesus knew this. They had work to do there, and that's where we get to Paul. Paul said, "Man, I want to go home. I want to be with Jesus. I want to get my room. I want to get my mansion and my crown," as the song says. I want to be there. He says, "But, I'm here. What am I going to do? Just stand around and wait? No, I got work to do. He's told me to go and preach the word. That's what I'm going to do." When Jesus said, "You may also be where I am," he's telling them there's more to this life than what you just see. Because there's those rooms that are prepared for us. And, Jesus spoke about this right before he died. He's talking with Pilate. Pilate was the Roman governor there. He was in charge of pronouncing life or death over people. So he's essentially in the Roman court. And Pilate's talking to him. He says, "Are you king of the Jews?" He says, "So you have said." Do you know that for yourself, or did somebody tell you that? And the conversation goes on, and then Jesus says, he makes this statement. This is John 18:36. "My kingdom is not of this world." Now think about this. If there were nothing after this, and Jesus was known for telling the truth, what could he be? Either he's lying or he's telling the truth. His kingdom is not in this world. Where is it? It is a spiritual kingdom. It is a kingdom that it's not made out of the same stuff we're looking at here. Of course, Pilate hears this, and immediately Pilate, even though he was a kind of crafty and shrewd guy, he immediately realized that Jesus is no threat to the Roman government, and he tries to release him, and we know how that turned out. In that kingdom, there's no sun, no moon, no stars. Why? You won't need it, because the light of God and Jesus illumine everything. Now, how that works? The light of truth. We'll have what the Bible is really telling us when there's no moon, no stars, and no sun, is that it's not exactly like you see here, what we're used to. It's different. There's no COVID in heaven. There's no self-serving politicians in heaven. There's no clueless leaders of our government in heaven. There's no hate. There's no fear. There's no disappointments. How many times have you been disappointed in your life because somebody told you something and then they turned around and did the other thing? If that isn't one of the most common human things, I don't know what is. So when you find people who do what they say they're going to do, boy, you want to be close to that person. You want to keep them close to you. Why? Because they're honest. Diogenes would be surprised, wouldn't he, that you found an honest person. But among our brothers and sisters, we have honesty. No hate, no fear, no disappointments, just love and understanding. You're in the presence of the author of love, of understanding, of kindness and goodness. Jesus knows all about our struggles. He will guide you till the day is done. Does that sound familiar to some of you? I see Philip shaking his head. Yeah, he knows exactly what that is. There's not a friend like the lowly or humble Jesus. No, not one, no, not one. Now, the writer of that song, I was going to look it up and everything, but I didn't. And I have to give credit to whoever the writer is. I know Philip's looking for it right now. But the idea is here, that guy, whoever wrote that, him or her, had it right. Yes, and we have struggles. Every day there is some struggle that we wind up getting anxious and worried about, and it sometimes gets us going and everything. There's an antidote to that. There is a great antidote to that. And here's what I've found for myself, and I believe this is true for all good Christians. You have a little talk with Jesus. Now, some people think about having this talk with God or Jesus is you got to be down on your knees, and you got to have your hands folded, you got to have your eyes closed. If you were going to your brother or your sister who you're close with, not even one of our brothers or sisters here, but a family member, is that how you go to them? Do you get down on your knees and close your eyes and say, please? No, you look them in the eye and you talk to them. You have a little talk with Jesus. Lord, I got a problem. You don't have to be down on your hands and knees. You don't have to do anything. You say, Lord, I have a problem. Now, he already knows this. He already knows that you have a problem. And he's watching to see what you're going to do. Remember, you have free will. And he's watching what are you going to do? And now you address, Lord, I got a problem. He says, yes, you have a problem. And now you say, and I need help. Okay, here we go. Now we're getting someplace. I need help. It's the admission I can't do this by myself. My good brothers and sisters are helping. My family is helping. But I still cannot do this by myself. So you have this little talk with Jesus and you tell him all about it. And he's listening to you. He'll give you what you need when you need it. Not necessarily what you want. You've got to remember that. He knows what you need better than you know. Now, if that need is for you to go home with him, so be it. That's what you need to do. You need to go home. He'll take you home. Your life here will cease, but then your life there begins. And if that's the answer, then that's the answer. Accept it. Why? Because that's what God wants. If he wants you to stay here, he'll tell you how to solve the problem. He'll work with you on it. Sometimes it is, keep your mouth shut and pay attention. Sometimes you gotta be more gentle with people. Sometimes, that approach isn't working, you gotta try another approach. But he will guide you if you allow him to do that. Jesus has perfect timing. And he has perfect words. Think of all the things that he said in the New Testament. There's no better way to say the things that he said. You can't shorten the words. When we talk about the comments that Jesus had, we have a lot. We use a lot more words. And I've often said this, and some of you remember this. Jesus has an economy of words. He gets the point across as quickly and as thoroughly as possible. They're perfect words. And he has perfect timing. And you can trust him to guide you through your struggles. Now, and one of the struggles we deal with is, when am I going to leave this place? And how am I going to leave? I don't want pain. I don't want this. I don't want to leave those who come after me with burdens and all these other things. I've got to get all my chores done. I got to make sure all my bank accounts are done. I got to do this. And he said, take it easy. You cannot add a single hair to your head or an hour to your life by getting anxious. We'll work through this together. We'll get it done. You put your fears and anxieties behind you. You learn to deal with things that you have influence over, and you let Jesus handle the rest of it. Should I get anxious over our government? No. Do I have direct influence over my government? I write a letter in the newspaper occasionally. That's about these things, and I vote. That's it. So am I going to get all worked up? Am I going to go tromping down to Washington, D.C. and stand there with a placard in my hand? That's not me. I don't do that. That's not what I do. Well, I'll let Jesus handle that. He'll figure out what's going on. He'll take care of it. May not be in my time or on my time schedule, but he will deal with it. Well, what about the Ukraine and the Russians? Do you have any control over what's going on over there? No. Let God handle that kind of stuff. He'll take care of it. He'll do what has to be done, and he'll do it in the way that he wants it to be done. And if that includes taking our lives, so be it, but we'll be home with him. So he said, well, my babies. You know what? If God takes a baby, that baby doesn't have to go to the judgment seat. Why? Because it doesn't have any sin. It doesn't have to answer for itself. There's a special place with Jesus for babies, little ones who do not know the difference between right and wrong. Don't worry about them. God will take care of them. He protects them. If you follow what Jesus says, he will protect you and take care of you. There's nothing bad that can happen to you that he does not already know about and take care of. He'll protect you. And remember, if you're called home, if this is the end of your life, that is not the worst thing that can happen to you. There's worse things than the death of this mortal body. And that worst thing is to be separated from God for the rest of eternity. To have no access to him. To not be able to live in that heavenly city. That's worse than death itself. Eternal punishment. But that's what God has in store for those who are not obedient to his word. You have to learn to be obedient. Just as when we were children, we had to learn to be obedient to our parents and to other authority figures. When we went to school, you had to listen to the teacher. Some of us had more problems with that than others. Not speaking of personal situations at all. But I'll tell you what, I learned. I got to be 16-year-old, and I realized my life is not going the way I want it to go. I'm not getting what I want out of this situation. So me being myself, I sit there and talk with myself. Well, what are you going to do about it? Well, what's the chance that I can get them to change their way of doing it? I'm not going to change society. I'm not going to change the rules. Well, what's the option? Well, either you don't change and you get whatever they give you, which is a lot of punishment, pain, and anxiety, or you begin to change and possibly have some way of getting happiness that you want. And that eventually led me to Jesus Christ. And once I made that decision, I started becoming having less anxiety, and particularly for me, less anger. And it took many, many years to get that out of my system. I was an angry young man. Then I became an angry middle-aged man. But I had to learn. I had to learn not to be angry and not to get anxious about all these things that I had no control over. And just deal with the things that God has given into my hands. And once I learned that, you know, my life got simpler. My life got happier. My life got more successful. And I can attest to that. I can tell you that's what happened with me. I didn't come to Christ early in my life. I mean, my religious life, yes, I was in Lutheran Bible classes and stuff like that. It didn't mean anything. It wasn't until I was in my 30s. Anyway, you don't need to hear all the details, but the fact is I'm here today to tell you the way to success in this life and the way to get rid of the anxieties and the way to stop worrying about what is to come is to go to Jesus and have a little talk with him. You have the opportunity this morning to give your life to Jesus, because if you've heard the gospel and you understand that Jesus is your Savior, he's the Savior of all mankind, that salvation is offered through him. And to get to the Father, you have to go through Jesus, which means being obedient. One of the things that he's told them is, you listen to my words, you do what I tell you to do. And he said, you have to be immersed, wash away your sins, so when your soul comes up out of the water, it's clean. Now you're acceptable to God. If you've heard these things and you're willing to have a change of heart, change the way that you deal with yourself, with your loved ones, and with the world, change your heart. Be sorry for those things and admit that. And you'd like to be immersed for the forgiveness of your sins, I'd ask you to come forward stand with me here, have a seat in the front as Dan leads us in this next song. Brother Dan.